Hello, welcome to the Home Ground. David Bashir with Max Schiffman. It's a deep dive into the 5% guarantee for home loans the government's rolled out. And they've also rolled out some big hitters, Anthony Albanese and Claire O'Neill on the hustings trying to sell this. So obviously October's a key date, Max. It's met with some criticism. Do you think it's going to place upward pressure on housing to the extent that it's going to negate its benefits overall?
Well, thanks, Bash. And so 1st of October, we've got this expanded home guarantee scheme. So previously, this was actually brought in about 5 years ago under the former Liberal government, but essentially a scheme where instead of having to have a 10% deposit in cash and also paying lender's mortgage insurance because you were borrowing more than 80% on your loan, instead the government would step in and effectively guarantee 15% of the loan, which meant you could get in with a smaller deposit of actually only having 5% cash, but also not pay the lender's mortgage insurance, which is a pretty substantial extra cost for the higher leverage loan. And so that scheme has existed for a while. It's gone through various guises, but the latest change has done a couple of things. It's increased the price caps on the property you can buy across Australia. So, for example, previously Brisbane was limited to a new property of $700,000. Now we've seen the market go crazy in Queensland in the last few years, so now that's $1 million as a new cap, and similar changes around the country based on how the median prices have changed. But the other thing is, which is really, I think, an interesting decision, is that they've removed any income test. So previously you were limited to up to $250,000 household income as a couple to make sure you're eligible for this scheme. Now there's no cap at all. So anyone, whether you're earning $100,000 or $10 million, technically can get the government to come in and guarantee your loan. Now, of itself, I've been a supporter of these sorts of schemes because getting the deposit together is really hard when you're paying rent or you've got an existing mortgage and you're trying to not mortgage, but you might have a business and it's hard to get the cash flow that you need. And so by reducing the amount you have to have in the bank to actually put down deposit for something is helpful on the proviso that you can still affordably pay off the balance of the mortgage. And so one of the key things here is that people should understand is it's not giving you a greater borrowing capacity. You can still borrow the same amount, but you're getting into the property with a lower deposit. So it's not exposing people to borrowing more than they otherwise would be able to under the tests. Short answer is it gets people in the housing market quicker if they're looking to be a first home buyer. The question then is, well, what does it do to house prices? And what we do know is there is still a housing shortage in Australia. All the talk about housing targets and getting more housing supply happening. We've been hearing that rhetoric for now 3 years out of the current federal government. And at this point in the cycle, we're still approving fewer homes than we were at the time that they first announced we had a housing crisis 3 years ago. So point of all that is, if you've got this new deposit scheme, which gives people higher caps and lets more people access it, and you're not marrying that with enough new housing supply to pick it up, guess what? It means house prices are going up.
Before we get on to supply, and that's a huge element of this whole mix, let's get into the commentary around this. Scott Pape, the outspoken author of the Barefoot Investor, and I want to read this quote to you, Max. He's warned the policy risks first home buyers taking on 95% of mortgages and becoming postcode povos vulnerable to interest rate hikes. Is he going too far?
There's a bit of rhetoric there. I think the key difference here is, as I touched on before, is unlike other things that have happened around the world, so you had the subprime crisis, the GFC, and in the US, in the precursor to that, you were really lending to people that couldn't afford it because you had this underlying backing from a federal bank that was effectively encouraging loans for people that could barely afford them, and packaging them up and then putting them into the market, and that sort of led to the whole thing unraveling. And the other thing to bear in mind is the US has something called non-recourse lending. So if you've got a home loan, the only security the bank has is against the property itself. So, what happened in the GFC was people could pick up their stuff, get out of the house, give back the keys to the bank and say thank you very much. And so there was a lot of people who lost money, but the banks lost a lot of money too because they had no choice other than to recoup their debt against the house. In Australia, we don't do non-recourse lending for home mortgages. So it means that people are on the hook. So let's say you borrow an amount of money, then you have to sell the house at a loss. Guess what? You still have to repay the full debt. Now, there's a couple of things about that. Firstly, it means that there's a lot more rigor in how lending works because the banks have to go and look at not only what's the value of the asset today, but what's your actual capacity to pay for it, because there's a lot of rules around not lending to people that can't afford it. And those rules have been tightened over the years, which includes an interest rate buffer over prevailing rates. And secondly, because you're on the hook, there's probably a better incentive to prioritise keeping your house. So in a tough time, people, they'll sacrifice things. They'll eat less expensive food, they'll go out less, they won't travel to hold the roof above their heads. And so I don't think something like this of itself exposes people to borrowing more because they're still capped by what those rules are.
Okay, so Scott Pape's connection to Australia and the subprime disaster in the United States, is that a bridge too far in your view?
I think it is. I think there's enough differences between the systems where you can't translate the specific circumstances in the US, which was really all about getting lower income people into their own home. That was actually the sort of thrust of the policy. This isn't quite the same. This is getting first homeowners who can safely borrow an amount of money into a property sooner by not having to save up the deposit as long.
Let's look at supply. The ambition is 1.2 million homes by 2029. Jim Chalmers says that's ambitious, but achievable. What do you think?
Well, I've been talking about this for a long time. I didn't think it was achievable from the outset, and now more and more people are getting, on song, including Michelle Bullock at the RBA, who's recently come out and said, "Yeah, that 1.2 million target's looking pretty tight there, guys," and that's again zero surprise. I mentioned the fact that supply hasn't really materially improved. In fact, it dropped further from when we sort of started the housing target, and it's only now getting back to roughly the annualised rate it was before all this housing crisis stuff was announced. And it isn't getting better quickly. There are still so many drags on building new housing, on the supply of land, on how all the red tape works, that there is zero chance, a negative chance of getting to 1.2 million homes today. And there's a part of me that I like having a target, but I'm kind of over the political gaslighting of don't worry, we can still get there if we just try a bit harder. We should be doing more. We should be trying to bridge the gap from where we're heading and where the target is. But I just find it so disingenuous to keep hearing from our politicians that no, don't worry, we're still going to get there.
Well, how do we get over this Groundhog Day nexus where obviously political outcomes are more important than economic and social outcomes? Like that, for me as an outsider, that's what it looks like. It just looks like the political survival of government is more important than the outcome of the people it governs.
Yeah. Look,
and how can we overcome that?
I wish I had a perfect answer for that. I mean, there's this perception out there that making it sound like you're doing a lot of stuff is more important than actually doing the stuff. And that's what I think the political class generally have cottoned on to. It's about how you sell the message. It's about how you pretend that you're going to do something about it. And if you don't achieve the outcome, well, oops, we tried. See, we were talking about it so much, we did our bit. And I just find that such a troubling thing. It's just become pervasive. I think there's less ability to hold government to account on their own promises. That's at state levels and at federal level. And a lot of it is because there's no aggregation of media anymore. I actually kind of blame social media for it because you only really hear the echo chamber that you're part of. So
is it because the messaging is so dumbed down we can't really get to the core of the problem? Is that why?
Absolutely. It's all about a press release and then the press release turning into a 30-second TikTok video that the Premier or the Housing Minister puts out there. And it's all, we're doing all this and it's all fantastic, it's all great, and it's all cringe, by the way. But
it is cringe.
It's very cringeworthy.
I don't want to see any more high-vis. Max, can we just ban it? Is that possible?
I would love that. If I was running for politics, I'd be banning high-vis and political videos.
It has to go.
Yeah. But it's all about creating that perception. It's not about the reality of what's actually happening on the ground. And I go back to data. I'm always posting about the data, what's actually going on. It's all well and good to say we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but I look at what the effect is. And I don't know what the answer is in terms of getting people to think broader than what they're fed by, those social media videos. But they have to. They have to understand that intent is wonderful. It's important. It's good that we have this intent to deliver more housing supply and get more affordable housing on the ground. But people need to understand it's political government policy that prevents industry from delivering it. It's not the industry. The industry wants to build housing, but it's the way politics and the bureaucratic system works that's preventing us from doing so.
Do you think it's well-meaning? The federal government, the Labor government, are they well-meaning but ill-advised and ill-structured to deliver outcomes? Is that what you think at the moment?
Yeah, I'm not knocking the meaning. I think it's good we're having the national conversation. I think a lot of the poor decision-making comes out of frankly, a perception of private industry. I think, private industry advocates for itself, and we have conversations with government and different departments and so forth. And a lot of that comes from direct experience of doing the very thing that the government says it wants to see more of. And yet the responses tend to be either far too slow when it comes to making decisions, or what we tell them is given an unnecessary degree of skepticism. It's like, well, they're trying to figure out what angle we have rather than just going, okay, actually these guys build it and they want to build more of it, and it's in everyone's mutual interest to build more of it. Why wouldn't you listen to them? And so I think often, I'd almost argue that the intense discussions and input that we have into these conversations are sometimes negative for us, because it's almost like, well, that greedy property developer told you should do this, so we should just do the opposite. And what's the opposite approach done for us? It's done nothing. It's actually been deleterious to the outcome. So I keep saying, listen to people who understand it and try some of that rather than this constant skepticism.
Okay, well, in the light of the October date and the fact that it's moving forward in this fashion, you've got a clean canvas, right? You're an artist, Max the artist in the housing game.
Not a bullshit artist.
No, you're not a bullshit artist. You're Max the artist, right? The housing artist. You've got a clean canvas. You've got the canvas on the easel, and you've got your palette. If it was a 3-point plan, what would you be doing with no barriers to improve the supply of housing in Australia?
Okay, so number one is you've just got to get more land available, full stop. That's around the cities, that's in the regions, it's maybe even finding land for new towns to develop over time. But you've got to identify the land and identify it quickly and not get caught up in the myriad of other things that you consider in these decisions, because there are so many things. There's always going to be, unfortunately, a paddock that has to be torn up to build some housing, or an old building has to get torn down to build something new. You got to decide what your priority is, and I think the absolute priority is unlocking developable land supply. So that's number one, get the land supply going. Second is, when you've got a proponent that's got a proposal, particularly of something of scale, it's just got to be shepherded through the system. None of this sort of bureaucratic wheel spinning, not referring it to 30,000 people and going through, 60 different public exhibition and community consultation processes, which is the stuff that bureaucrats love to do just to show they're doing something. Often has very little impact on their net result. So I'd say you just got to bring these things through the system quicker. And there's been some moves to do that. You've got Development Facilitation Program in Victoria. You've got now this Housing Delivery Authority in New South Wales. Early signs, but I think they're focusing in on the wrong types of housing to build. But nonetheless, these things are starting to happen. We need to expand that right out to get a lot more stuff happening.
But there has to be the right type of community consultation?
Yeah, look, there's a time for it. But, I think you get communities involved if you're fundamentally reshaping an existing area. I don't think communities have as much of a say or should have as much sway in newer areas. And that's why Greenfields presents those opportunities, because you don't have that same pressure of existing population that want things to remain exactly the way they used to be.
So I interjected, you're on 2, aren't you?
That's 2.
Yes.
So number 3 is infrastructure. So again, it's you need to seed those places with the right infrastructure early, and that's how you unlock them. So none of this is rocket science. None of it's stuff I haven't even said before, but you've got to marry those 3 things up. And I don't know why we're talking about this 3 years later with virtually no progress on marrying three really basic principles together to get more housing supply going. Instead, we just get headlines and we're going to build this and we're going to build that, except you're not building it. You're saying we're going to create the opportunity for someone else to build it, but they're not building it for a reason. It's because it's not stuff that people want or can build.
And is it not happening because of the finger pointing between federal and state, or the lack of flow in legislation and some of the infrastructure, the rules and infrastructure surrounding development?
Yeah, I think a lot of decision making is being made based on a poor understanding of the actual cost of the delivery of infrastructure for governments. There are some major misconceptions around the cost of building new infrastructure against retrofitting existing areas, and those are some fundamental problems. And that misunderstanding is leading to some very poor decision making. So I think that's a big part of it. The second thing is just the misallocation of funding. You keep getting these mega projects built around the place that, they get to talk about the price tag. Like somehow the price tag is the brag. Why, we're building this thing and it's $20 billion, or building this for $34 billion, or this is $60 billion. That seems to be the measure, rather than is this delivering value for the people that are going to use it, or for the existing ratepayers or taxpayers of the state, or for future residents of this state or area. That's not the question being asked. It's we're building a $25 billion building tunnel, or whatever the case might be. So we're losing sensible decision making in the process. We're seeing more and more projects sit outside proper structured infrastructure investment and assessment processes, and it's all politics.
Okay, and in summary, Max, is it less high vis and better outcomes in your view?
Yeah, less high vis, less dancing on TikToks, and more getting shit done.
I haven't seen a housing minister dance on TikTok. Is that happening?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and riding scooters and playing basketball, you name it. So you need, I should stop watching this stuff.
Maybe I'm glad I'm not on TikTok.
Well, you are on the home ground.
Oh, that's right. Inadvertently. Max, thank you.
Great chat as always, Bash.
We'll see you soon on the home ground.